Irish Nation, welcome back. This is Cheeseburger Week, brought to you by Charlie Weiss. No, just kidding, but I'm your host today, Brett, running solo. Just got back from my trip to Italy with my wife, had an awesome time in Rome and the Amalfi Coast, and ate more pasta than I think Charlie Weiss has ever consumed in cheeseburgers, and that is a challenge, Charlie. I will take you on. I will out eat your cheeseburgers in cacio e pepe and carbonara and all the great food in Italy. Had an awesome time, but excited to be back stateside with our listeners. I've got my Fisher Hall shirt out, RIP to Fisher Hall. The dorm that I lived in is no more, taken down this year, but wanted to celebrate the dorm here over the bye week. I've got two topics to cover on the show today. First off, looking forward to our Stanford Cardinal against our now arch rival from the Atlantic Coast Conference. Can you believe it? The ACC, Stanford, all the way out there in Palo Alto, covering the ACC. Times are weird. And then I'm going to sit at the halfway point in this season, bye week. Always a good time to say, where do we stack up? We talk about all these advanced metrics, explosiveness and havoc and SP+, but where are we? And I think it's pretty straightforward. Offense has some room for improvement, and defense, not only very elite, but surging in a couple of key areas. I'll dig into that later on in the show. Let's start with the Stanford Cardinal. They stink, ladies and gentlemen. Notre Dame is a huge favorite coming into this matchup. Stanford is 2-3. They've got a win over Cal Poly, an FCS team, and then a very surprising win over Syracuse. But by and large, other than that Syracuse game, just not a competitive football team. They've been blown out by Clemson. They've been blown out by what's expected to be a bad Virginia Tech football team. And my favorite thing to cover every year is maybe my all-time hot take about Stanford football. Unfortunately, I made it before I had a podcast to tell the world, but it's about how admissions impacted Stanford football. Back in 2017, college football went to an early signing period where commits, football recruits could commit in December, in the middle of bowl season. And Stanford said, nope, we have our admissions process. We aren't going to send out our acceptances until January at the earliest. So if a football recruit wants to commit, they can't do it at Stanford during the early signing period. And it killed them in recruiting. I think it was the biggest downfall to David Shaw departing, where they would consistently recruit like Notre Dame in the 10 to 20 range, have really strong recruiting classes, pull in, legit 5-star best caliber players like Christian McCaffrey and Andrew Luck and just bona fide studs. That stopped happening beginning in 2017. And eventually their admissions relented. They now participate in the early signing period, but it's been too late. And I think the story of the Stanford football is a lack of talent. In 2021, they had the 43rd recruiting class. 2022, they popped to 19. But since then, under new coach Troy Taylor, back to 44th recruiting class in 23 and the 31st recruiting class in 24. And importantly, they are getting killed in the transfer portal. In the last 2 years, they have had 35 players depart the program and have brought in just 8. So a major talent flight. All of that leading to just not the same Stanford football of old, and have really struggled here in recent years, including this year. Let's get into some advanced stats. On offense, 95th in success rate generated on offense, that all-important measure of staying on schedule. Can you pick up 5 yards on first down? Can you pick up most of what you need on second down? Can you convert on third down? They're just not staying on schedule. An example of that, their offensive line is just getting pushed around. They rank 87th in line yards measured. That's a measurement of looking at how much of the run game is generated by your offensive line. They're just not getting a push. They are 114th in explosiveness. They just don't have a quarterback. They just don't have a big-time playmaker that can go and generate downfield plays. They don't have a Christian McCaffrey. And they're 131st in havoc allowed. A ton of disruptive plays, a ton of negative rushing yards, a ton of sacks taken. So you add that together, they're not really good at anything. They just don't have an offensive identity. They aren't generating big plays. They aren't staying on schedule, and defenses are having a field day disrupting this offense. All of that leads to the all-important advanced metric of the SP plus efficiency. They are 82nd in that measure. And honestly, it feels a little bit generous when you start putting in context the rest of the stats. Key players to watch: Ashton Daniels is their quarterback. He struggled. He's had a lower body injury. Against Virginia Tech in the last game, they went out with their backup, Justin Lamson, for health reasons, and that was even worse. The two quarterbacks on the year have averaged for under 200 yards per game. That should sound familiar to Notre Dame fans, but the difference is very turnover prone. 7 interceptions on the year, just 9 touchdowns, not protecting the ball. Importantly, it's very unclear if Ashton Daniels is going to be back. I think they're a better football team if they do have Daniels. He's a threat in the run game. He's their leading rusher. But outside of that, not a lot of talented skill position players. Their leading rusher, who's a running back, is Micah Ford. He's averaging just about 45 yards per game, so hasn't really gotten it going. Alec Ayomainer, apologies if I got that name wrong, Malort shot waiting for me. He's their leading receiver on the year with just 317 yards, but a bit of a downfield threat. He's averaging 13 yards per catch. If they have any explosiveness generated, it's been through that top wide receiver. But overall, this is an ugly, ugly offense. I just don't see any scenario where this team can really get it going against Al Golden. The one sliver is if Ashton Daniels is able to get things humming, dual threat QB, try to keep Notre Dame's defense in check from just, going ears back, pin back and getting after the quarterback. On defense, it's not much better than the offense. In fact, it's a little worse in certain areas. They're 91st in success rate allowed. They're 86th in explosiveness allowed. They're 73rd in havoc generated. All that relates to the 84th overall defense on SP+. And they've gone up against some decent teams. They've gone up against a pretty good Virginia Tech offense. They've gone up against a pretty good Clemson offense. And they're hanging in there, but they're giving up 30, 35, 40 points in those games. And similar to the offense, there's just not an identity here. It's not like they're good in any one area. It's not like they're great at stopping the run. It's not like they're great at getting after the quarterback. It's not like they're great at least generating some disruptive plays or at least limiting the big play. It's just not really coming together on the defensive side of the ball. There's a couple of bright spots in terms of individual players. I think the best player on this team is their starting cornerback, Colin Wright. Maybe the first time I've seen this all year. Stats that look very Ben Morrison-like. Halfway through the season, he's allowed just 108 yards, has 2 interceptions. Both of those, for what it's worth, are actually better metrics than Ben Morrison. Going up against pretty good top, wide receiver talent. They have 2 very solid linebackers in Tristan Sinclair and Gathan Bernadelle. Bernadelle in particular, 3rd on the team in tackles and has just 1 missed tackle on the year. So 2 really good tackling linebackers in the middle to try to hold this thing together. But as a team, only 8 sacks generated so far. The defensive line is graded out poorly. Other than Colin Wright, they've appeared pretty susceptible in the secondary. This seems like a good matchup for Notre Dame's offense to get back on track. I think particularly for our offensive line to start getting humming. This is just not going to be the front 7 that we saw against Louisville or Texas A&M. And all of that leads to bad offense, bad defense against a very elite Notre Dame defense and still a pretty good Notre Dame offense despite weaknesses we've addressed here on the show and I think have been pretty apparent for anyone watching Notre Dame football this year. There's a reason why Notre Dame is a big favorite in this game. 96% win probability, 23.5 point favorite according to Las Vegas. The over-under is at 46.5, so that implies about a 35-11 score. So Notre Dame big favorites in this one. SP Plus thinks Notre Dame's an even bigger favorite. 27, 28 points is about where the SP Plus line sits for this one. I'm going to favor the SP Plus on this one. I always lean towards SP Plus over Vegas. So if they've got us winning it by 27, 28, I will take that Las Vegas line all day. I've got Notre Dame winning this one big, 35-7. Big win over our now ACC rival, the Stanford Cardinal. Still weird to say that the Stanford Cardinal is in the Atlantic Coastal Conference, but ladies and gentlemen, here we are. All right, we are flying through this. We are 10 minutes in, and I am 1 of 2 segments down. That's what happens when I don't have a co-host to go back and forth with. So, on to our bye week mid-season evaluation. Where are we shining? Where are we not so shining? And on the player side, who's standing out, who's not. That's the 4 topics I'm going to cover here at the midway point in the season. The advanced metrics on our defense are phenomenal. 8th in SP plus. How are we doing it? First off, the beginning of the year felt a lot like bend don't break. We were limiting success rate, but we weren't generating a ton of havoc. That's starting to change. Overall, we're 36th in havoc at 19%. Defenses really want to be in the high teens, that 19% number, clearly top quartile in the country, but it's getting even better every week. It was 24% against a really good Louisville offense. It was 28% against Miami at Ohio. It was an absurd 50% in the big blowout down at West Lafayette against Purdue. So if you even just look at how we're trending going into the bye week, the havoc that Al Golden has started to generate, this isn't a bend don't break defense anymore. It is a disruptive defense. What has stayed consistent is we're just not giving up the big play. We're 7th in explosiveness allowed, and that's credit to a very stellar secondary. Really removing that one lucky 83-yard passing touchdown by NIU where they completely split, a very small window and kind of had our 2 defenders run into each other. You take that out, and we're a top 5 team in terms of just not giving up big plays. And then on top of that, those 2 metrics really help you keep teams off schedule. We're 18th in success rate. And so teams just aren't able to go march down the field and put together 10, 12, 14 play scoring drives. We just have too much disruption, and we just don't allow a lot of chunk plays. As a reminder, those metrics that I just listed, 36th in havoc, 7th in explosiveness allowed, 18th in success rate, those are not opponent adjusted. So for example, we're 18th in success rate allowed, but there's teams on there that are better than us in that metric like Louisiana Tech, Hawaii, James Madison, University of Texas at San Antonio, not at Austin. They're all better than us in those metrics, but play much weaker schedules. And so when you opponent adjust those key metrics, it's how we wind up being 8th in SP plus. And I would maintain that if we continue to be able to not give up the big play, keep teams off schedule, kind of have that bend don't break vibe, but adding in the disruption, adding in the sacks, adding in the turnovers generated that we've been able to do in the last 3 games, we are trending towards more upside towards a top 5 defense. That's really exciting. It's what we were expecting out of this unit, and they're delivering in a big way. On the offensive side of the ball, the shiny advanced metric that I think is really defining the season, it's defining why, we want to get into all these reasons of what's wrong with the Notre Dame offense. We're still 30th in SP plus. It's not like this is Iowa. It's not like this is Northwestern that would have a top 10 defense and a bottom 10 offense. We're still a top quartile offense across college football. And why is that? We've been able to generate explosiveness. We're 9th in explosiveness index according to college football stats. And that's not necessarily because we're generating the most big plays, but relative to the rest of our offense, relative to the amount of 5-yard plays we have, we've been able to generate big time plays that have bailed us out. It was a huge reason why we were so successful against Purdue, against Texas A&M, really in every single game except for NIU. It was the big play that got us over the hump time and time again. And on top of that, we ranked just 11th in havoc allowed. So sure, we're not staying on schedule very well. I'll get to that in a minute. We're not able to keep churning out 5, 6, 7-yard plays and march down the field with consistency. It is very stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, bunch of 3 and outs, and then just waiting for the big play to hit. But we also aren't letting teams move us around. Part of that's a dual threat quarterback in Riley Leonard. He's been under pressure on 31% of his dropbacks, but just isn't taking a lot of sacks. He's able to get that ball out. He's able to escape pressure. He's able to keep plays alive. And so we aren't turning it over a lot. We aren't moving backwards. Jeremiah Love isn't getting tackled in the backfield very often. And so we're 11th in havoc allowed, 9th in explosiveness. It's a good enough formula to be the 30th offense. But as I'll get to in a minute, there's some real things holding us back on offense that are preventing us from being a top 25 unit Going into the year, that was the expectation. Going into the year, it was Riley Leonard and Mike Denbrock. Can they elevate us from being around that 25 to 35 level the last few years and really be a top 20 unit to pair with our defense? That's not happening. Why is that not happening? It's success rate. We are 85th in the country in success rate at just 42%. And offenses really want to be in the high 40s. And I know that doesn't sound like a big gap, but what that really means is in the course of playing 60, 70, 80 snaps in a game, you need that number closer to 50%. So that's 4 or 5 plays where we should be picking up first downs, or we should be setting up a second and short, or we should be, leaving ourselves 2nd and 2, not 2nd and 8. We should be getting ourselves to 3rd and 1, not 3rd and 6. We're just not staying on schedule. And it's really putting us in the, pun intended, behind the chains. And that is making it so hard to sustain drives. And it's what's making us so reliant on explosiveness. It's what's making us so reliant on the home run play. And it's easy to blame the passing game. Everyone wants to talk about the quarterback situation at Notre Dame. Everyone wants to talk about Riley Leonard's not getting the job done. Well, we're 85th overall in success rate on expected passing downs. So when it's 2nd and long or 3rd and long, like you just know we're passing the ball. We are 77th in success rate. Not very good. But on our running plays, we're 75th. We're not doing any better on either side of the ball in terms of consistently staying on schedule. Jeremiah Love has been very boomer bust this year. Jadarian Price has been very boomer bust this year. So something that stood out as we've paused at the bye week, Denbrock's got more to figure out than just, can we get Riley Leonard converting those 5 and 6 yard plays? We also need more 5 and 6 yard runs by our running backs that aren't just like 1 yard, 30 yards. We need more consistency in both elements of the offense that just hasn't been there. Before moving on to standout players, one place on the defense to watch out that's also not quite so shiny, it's our rush defense. It's been a little leaky. We've largely gotten away from it, but it was an Achilles heel in that NIU game. The defense clearly did enough to go beat NIU, but NIU is able to sustain some drives with 5, 6, 7, 8 yard rushes, pick up a couple first downs, burn some clock against Louisville, Miami of Ohio, even really every game except for Texas A&M and Purdue. Teams have been able to run on us. A metric that highlights that, line yards allowed. Line yards allowed measures how much of the running game is being given up by the opposing team's offensive line. How much push are they generating? We are 99th in that metric. We are getting pushed off the ball, and running backs are getting 2, 3, 4, 5 yards downfield before we even contact them. And when that happens, not good. Running backs with a full head of steam, they're falling forward even if we get them on that first tackle, and they're picking up positive yardage. That's an area a bit surprising, right? You've got Howard Cross and Riley Mills, 2 very experienced defensive tackles, 5th-year seniors, NFL caliber talent. Really bit of a surprise. It's an area I'll see if, I want to watch going forward. Does that get cleaned up by Al Golden? Or are we just by design saying, you know what, if we're going to give up something, we're going to give that up, but we're going to keep pressuring the quarterback. We're going to keep making sure we're staying fundamentally sound and not give up the big play. And if we're going to give up one thing, it's going to be that. But it is the one Achilles heel that's crept up. You can see that in your line yards allowed. All right. Who's standing out as the best players on the team? The entire defense. I could spend the next hour talking about the plethora of contributors on the defensive side of the football, but I'm going to start with our 2 very obvious All-Americans. Xavier Watts leads the team in Pro Football Focus grades. We've talked about this a lot on the show. We love the metrics that Pro Football Focus provides. Their grading system, it's pretty subjective. It's a lot of guys sitting in a room marking up whether or not they thought players had positive plays, neutral plays, or negative plays. A lot of subjectivity. But some things don't lie. Xavier Watts has 1 missed tackle on the season in the safety position. He is there to clean up when everything else breaks down. That's the job of the safety. And all but one time on the year, he does it every single play. Solid tackler out of the secondary. In coverage, he's allowed just 83 yards when he's the primary defender in the passing game. 83 yards through 5 games for your safety. Unbelievable, high caliber player. And it's turning into a bit of a Ben Morrison show where he's not going to be an All-American this year because people just aren't targeting him. People say, where's Xavier Watts? Where are Ben Morrison? And I'm just looking at the other 9 guys, and I'm just going to try to play 9-on-9 football and see what I can do and just completely stay away from those 2 guys. What's awesome, when you put Watts and Morrison on opposite sides of the field, the quarterback's not left with a lot of options when they're covering both sides of the football. But overall, Xavier Watts, I think he's our best player on the team, bar none, either side of the football. Who do I think is our second best player? And in fact, every other show this year, I would have told you I think he was our best player, but he got picked on a little bit at Louisville. I know he was banged up. I know he was injured, but I thought that Louisville game made me elevate Xavier Watts just a little bit. Of course, I'm going to go with my guy, Ben Morrison. Through 5 games, he's allowed just 12 catches. That's absurd. He's on pace to allow just 25 catches for less than 300 yards is what he's pacing towards. Through 5 games, just 125 yards. That's absurd. He is out there guarding WR1 every single game and is on track to give up less than 300 yards on the year. Hats off. He's just incredible. He's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He's just become one of my favorite all-time Notre Dame players. And there's just not enough stats in the world. There's not enough wide receivers he's shut down. There's not enough opposing coaches in interviews that just shake their head and say, oh, we saw 20 out there and we just knew we couldn't throw in that direction. So we had to game plan around it. Like, he hears that from coaching interviews by opposing teams every week, and I love every part of it. What's hard about going past that on the rest of this defense is there are so many contributors. 10 different guys have a sack, no more than 3. That's a testament to depth. It's a testament that Jordan Botelho went down. We didn't miss a beat. Now Boubacar Traore went down, but we're hoping to get back Burnham. We're hoping to get back Drake Bowen and some other contributors. The young talent is awesome. Jaden Osbury at linebacker has really started to pop, plays with a ton of speed. I think he's got JOK-like mentality in terms of just flying to the football. Very disruptive player. Leonard Moore, true freshman who's really emerged. Christian Gray's been banged up a little bit at corner. Ben Morrison's missed some time at corner. And now Jaden Mickey is transferred out. Leonard Moore has really stepped up and been incredibly solid in coverage. So I think the entire defense, it's just hard. I haven't even mentioned Jack Kaiser, Riley Mills, and Howard Cross, who have just kept doing the things that those guys have been doing for 5 years here. Really, really fun defense. It's just like, it's such a bummer that the offense is not holding up their end, because this defense is like all-time favorite. We're going to be sitting a decade from now talking about this defensive unit like we did the Manti Te'os and Ishaq Williams and that 2012 squad. Like, this is just an all-time defensive unit, maybe the best Notre Dame's had since the Lou Holtz era. I could easily make the argument that this team is starting to surge at a defensive level that's up there with the 2012 team. And it's hard to think of another year where we were this dominant. Teams just aren't even sniffing drives against this team. And now they're generating the havoc with it. Awesome to see. What players are not stepping up the way we'd expect them to play? There's no one on the defense, just to be clear. I can't think of a single player on the defense right now where we can sit and say, man, they aren't contributing like I thought they would. It's just not there. On the offense, I think it's every single part related to the passing game. Again, it is really easy to sit here and pick on Riley Leonard. I think that's been the narrative. I get it. It's what happens when you wear the quarterback's uniform at the University of Notre Dame. The expectations are sky high. I get it. He's only thrown the ball for 750 yards. He's on pace for one of the worst passing productivity seasons in Notre Dame for a very long time. I get it. He hasn't thrown for more than 163 yards in a game. Doesn't work. But he's our leading rusher. He's accounted for 10 touchdowns through 5 games. But we have an offensive line that's really banged up, really young, is grading out poorly on Pro Football Focus, is one of the worst teams, a bottom 30 team in line yards generated. I talked about how our defense, that's actually kind of their Achilles heel. On our offense, it ain't good either. We're generating just 2 yards before contact rushing the football, well below average. You really want that metric closer to 3, and we're just 2, like 50% below where you kind of want to be is how I think about that metric. Maybe not 50, 30, 40% below expectations of generating a push from the offensive line. Riley Leonard has been under pressure on 31% of his throws. So 1 in 3 throws where he's back there in the pocket, we're not keeping the pocket clean. So there's a lot of chatter out there of like, gosh, he just doesn't trust the pocket. He bails out too early. If the first read's not there, he starts trying to run it. Well, yeah, if you're under pressure 1 in 3 times, you're thinking, okay, well, on the other 2, the pressure's probably coming. Wide receivers. The media in the offseason love Pete Sampson, but a perfect example at The Athletic. Pete Sampson talked so much about the massive wide receiver upgrade, and he's now backed off that a little bit. He's kind of said, look, we just said it would be an upgrade versus last year because last year was bad. Well, this year's not that much better. We've talked about it throughout the offseason. We lost a lot of guys like Rico Flores and Chris Tyree, who were productive wide receivers for Notre Dame last year and had some big moments. And we replaced them with guys that aren't really bona fide number ones. We haven't really heard Chris Mitchell's name. Jaden Harrison had his first really big play against Louisville on a busted coverage. Bo Collins is our leading receiver, but just 181 yards. He's not even on pace to top 500 yards. And I get it. It's a two-way street. Riley Leonard's missed some wide open throws, but we aren't really generating protection. We aren't generating big, explosive wide receivers. There's not a wide receiver where it's just like, man, he's so wide open. He's just dominating the secondary. Like, how are we not getting him the ball? The film doesn't support that. The film doesn't support that Riley Leonard's just like not getting the ball thrown where it's supposed to be going. He might be throwing some ducks when that happens, but there's not a massive amount of separation either where you're saying, man, we're wasting Michael Floyd out here. Man, we're wasting Chase Claypool. Man, we're wasting Will Fuller. That's not the narrative. This entire passing game, from the offensive line to the wide receivers to the quarterback, is really holding back this team. Lastly, what's a mixed message? I didn't know where to put this. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. They've had some amazing moments. They're averaging 7 yards per carry. But it's been all explosiveness. We mentioned that we're 75th in success rate, 75th in staying on schedule when we rush the ball. It's been very boomer bust. It has been very churning out 2-3 yards a carry and then popping that big 50-yard run, popping that, highlight hurdling touchdown run. But we aren't generating consistency. Now, how much of that is on Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price versus the offensive line? I just chronicled that the offensive line is one of the worst teams in the country at generating push, just 2 yards before contact, which means that Love and Price are making up for it with 5 yards after contact. That's awesome, but it's largely on the boomer bust plays. And so I love those two guys. I think they are standout running backs. Jeremiah Love is going to be pushing, getting close to a 1,000-yard season by the time this thing's done. That's what he's on pace for, flirting with that 1,000-yard mark. I'd like to see a little more consistency. Part of that's getting them touches. We just aren't having enough games where Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are getting 20, 25, 30 carries. A lot of that's being eaten up by Riley Leonard, but I'd love to see a way to get those two more involved and more consistently productive in the offense. So, where does that leave us at the midway point in the season? What's the upside case from here? What's the downside case? I'm going to hold off on some of the big picture, what does it all mean questions in terms of the playoff scenarios and are we a legit contender? I'm working on getting one of our buddies on the show next week. We'll cover some of those big picture questions following the Stanford game. But I do want to talk about kind of efficiently, how do we get there? How do we get our 30th in the country in offensive efficiency? How do we get that into the top 25? How do we get our 8th most efficient defense in the country into the top 5? I think on defense, it's really clear cut. It is doing what we've done in the last 3 games, combining that stout, not giving up a high success rate, keeping teams off schedule, and adding to it the havoc. So I think for the defense, it's really straightforward. They're already on an upward trajectory, which is crazy for how good they've been at the start of the year, that they've already shown we're getting even better in these last 2-3 football games since the NIU letdown especially. On offense, it's a tougher question. Can we sustain drives? Can we pass for over 200 yards a game? Can we get 20 carries to Love and Price and really unlock them into the massive Kyron Williams, Audric Estime, Dexter Williams, Josh Adams type performances that we just haven't seen yet? Can we go and win a game where our offense just dominates by putting 40-some points on the board against someone other than Purdue? If we do, this team has a legit shot to run the table. If we don't, probably not. And as much as I want to talk about the running, as much as I want to talk about, I'm nitpicking on Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price just being too good at explosive plays and not quite good enough at the 4, 5, 6-yard carries. But the passing game has to work. How do we get there? I thought of 2 narratives. These aren't advanced metrics. I think there's too many things just kind of not clicking right now for me to sit here. I'm not a football coach. I never wore football pads. I never played quarterback. I don't have a way to assess schematically what's going on. I don't have a way to assess Riley Leonard as a passer other than I'm seeing some ducks that, didn't really see against Louisville, but have seen in some other games. And a couple narratives stand out. Pete Sampson at The Athletic wrote in his weekly mailbag letter, highly recommend everyone go and read Pete Sampson. Think he's great at chronicling this stuff. When Notre Dame recruited Riley Leonard and was watching his tape, they were not expecting that he was going to need not 1, but 2 ankle surgeries. They were not expecting he was going to miss all of spring practice. They were not expecting he was going to miss the beginning of summer practice before camp officially opened. This is a guy that missed 7 games last year. He hasn't played a lot of football in the last 18 months, and he was already a developmental passer. That was the area he had to improve. It now looks like he's really rusty. So there's a chance this team gets better by Leonard just settling in, by Leonard just getting more game reps, getting his sea legs back underneath him, getting back in the rhythm of this offense and really learning it, really getting into the installment of the game plan in a way that you just can't mimic by watching spring practice. You could argue it's actually hard to learn an offense just by being in spring practice, let alone not actually participating and just being on the sidelines watching. That's a really hard way to learn the offense. The other element is Mike Denbrock has a track record of really elevating quarterbacks after year 1. A great example is Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels in year 2 at LSU won the Heisman and is now dominating on Sundays for the Washington Commanders. He struggled in his first 4, 5, 6 games under Mike Denbrock's offense. I can't remember the exact stat, but I think in his first Power 5 game, the first time LSU went up against a Power 5 opponent, he threw for just 80 yards. He stunk. He wasn't getting through reads. He wasn't trusting the offense. He wasn't trusting his looks. And two years later, he's winning a Heisman Trophy and was the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, or number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft, and is crushing it. That is the progression we're hoping to see from Riley Leonard. And I don't need him to turn into a Heisman Trophy winner. I don't need 2 full years for Riley Leonard to figure it all out, but it's go time. We need to use this bye week to get that going. We need to use this bye week to really accelerate that development, really accelerate his comfort in the offense, and really move this offense from a top 30 unit to a top 25, top 20 unit. What gives me hope this is possible? It's what Notre Dame did. I think it was 2021. Jack Cohn was our quarterback, and we stunk on offense in the first 4 or 5 games. And we barely pulled out a come from behind victory at Virginia Tech and then went into a bye week. And Tommy Rees sat down with Brian Kelly and they studied the film. They said, what are we going to do right? What aren't we doing well? Did a ton of self-scouting and said, you know what? Jack Cohn is so immobile that if he holds the ball for 3, 4, 5 seconds and there's any pressure, we're toast. But Jack Cohn, really good at progressions. Let's just start running quick passing plays only. And we went from 3, 4, 5 seconds to get the ball out to like 1.5. And it was like, bam, quick throw, bam, quick throw, bam, quick throw. And it totally opened up the offense. It totally muted an opposing team's ability to blitz on us. And we went on to have a great season, rest of the way, 110 plus games with Jack Cohn, a pretty okay quarterback. I'm not predicting that's the fix for Notre Dame. I'm not predicting quick passing is the fix. But what I am predicting is if Tommy Rees and Brian Kelly can self-scout and make a big-time tweak, and emphasis tweak, like just going and saying, you know what, we just got to run more quick passing routes. Okay, let's do more of that in the play calling and have a big-time impact. I think Mike Denbrock can figure that out here too. I think he can go and self-scout and say what's working, what's not working, what do I throw out of the playbook, what's just like, you know, it's just not working with my players. It's just not working with a young offensive line. It's just not working with a guy with Riley Leonard's skill set, both positive and negative. I think that type of adjustment is what we really are looking to see. It's what I'm really looking to see out of Stanford. Is there something in average depth of throw, average time to throw, amount of play action, amount of use of the screens? Is it in our formations? Do we have more 2 running back looks? Do we have more spread looks? Do we have more power football looks? Is there some change in our tendencies that comes out of this bye week on our offensive passing game? Big unlock for the rest of the way. So until next week, go Irish, beat Cardinals. Have a good one.